Isabel, it's great to have you on the show.
I so want to know, or maybe I don't want to know.
Oh.
I mean, what horrors may they come up with?
Oh, we're on it, don't you worry. What would you like to have been, do you reckon?
Isabel Oakeshott didn't hold back for a second. Right there, on live TV, she exposed a shocking deal that Keir Starmer's government allegedly made behind closed doors, giving away British territories without so much as a heads up to Parliament or the public. It's a story of secrecy, broken promises, and a heavy price tag for taxpayers who had no say in the matter. How did we get here, and what else might be hidden beneath the surface?
Finding enough. But when you take on board, Isabel, that only 5% or so of all crimes are ever solved, only 5% result in an arrest and a conviction. So what we're talking about with this 120,000 crimes, that's the tip of the iceberg.
Isabel Oakeshott brought to light a secret deal involving Keir Starmer's government that allegedly handed over British overseas territories to a foreign power, all without the usual parliamentary scrutiny. Imagine that. Territories that are strategically important to Britain were quietly signed over, and not a single member of Parliament was given a chance to vote or even discuss the matter. Typically, when there's any decision this big, especially involving territories under British jurisdiction, Parliament is expected to debate, approve, or at least be informed. Yet in this case, nothing of the sort happened. Instead, it appears that Starmer's administration bypassed the very procedures that serve to protect British sovereignty and ensure democratic accountability.
His hand now, Isabel, but she doesn't really seem. Doesn't seem to have anything to say. I mean, what she came up with was a really predictable, cliched crime.
The lack of transparency in this deal raises serious questions about the values that Starmer's government claims to uphold. One of the fundamental tenets of democracy is accountability, and accountability starts with transparency. When the details of this agreement surfaced, people were naturally shocked. MPs, who represent their constituents' voices, found themselves completely blindsided, with no information and no input. This cloak of secrecy around such an impactful decision hints at a larger issue with the current leadership's approach to governance. For the government to cut a deal behind closed doors is one thing, but when that deal involves giving away British territories, it's no longer just a matter of concern. It's a potential violation of public trust.
Any decision there could potentially cost British taxpayers tens of billions of pounds.
Yes, and I think the thing is that this is a discussion. It's a discussion that has been going on.
One of the most jaw-dropping aspects of this secret deal is the revelation that British taxpayers are expected to fund infrastructure for the new territorial holders. Essentially, not only has British land reportedly been handed over without public input or a parliamentary vote, but the very people from whom this land was taken, the British citizens, are now being asked to pay to support this transfer. For most, this sounds like adding insult to injury. Why should British taxpayers, already bearing the brunt of various economic pressures, be made to cover costs for something they didn't agree to in the first place? This setup feels fundamentally unfair and has caused public outrage. The outrage isn't surprising. Imagine being told that your taxes are going to be spent on infrastructure for foreign territories given away in a deal you had no say in. British taxpayers are often called upon to support domestic needs, especially during times of crisis, yet here they are, seemingly being compelled to fund a transaction that strips them of assets. Many people see this as a flagrant misuse of public funds, where hard-earned money is being siphoned off to sustain a secretive and possibly irresponsible political move. The situation has raised a deeper question about the government's priorities and accountability to the citizens it serves. When taxpayers' money is used, there's an expectation that it will be for the country's collective benefit, not for backdoor deals shrouded in secrecy.
Trade which could run for the UK into the billions. It's something that the Prime Minister wanted to keep off the agenda coming to this summit. He said there's no plans to discuss it. He wanted to look forward and talk about economic growth.
One of the most significant concerns regarding this secretive deal is its geopolitical implications, particularly as the territories in question have reportedly gone to a nation with strong ties to China. In the current global landscape, where countries like China are actively seeking strategic footholds, handing over British territories to a Chinese ally has understandably raised eyebrows. These territories hold strategic value, and their control can influence not only the UK's position, but also the security of its allies. The last thing the UK wants is to see increased Chinese influence in areas that could compromise national security or weaken the UK's standing with its global partners.
In that he wants to have a frank talk with Keir Starmer about reparatory justice. So other leaders being vocal on this now. So it's something I think the Prime Minister wanted to keep off.
China's growing influence in regions of strategic importance has been a concern for Western allies for years. And this deal potentially opens another door for Beijing to expand its reach. When land with tactical significance is handed over to a country that aligns itself with China, the ramifications extend far beyond simple land ownership. It poses questions about security, military access, and influence in areas crucial to the UK and its allies. For instance, if China's ally gains leverage in these territories, it could mean that Chinese policies, economic influence, or even military presence could make their way closer to British shores. Such a development could disrupt the balance of power in the region and complicate the UK's relationships with other allies who may view this deal as a weakening of the Western Bloc.
A very public split over this that certainly the UK Prime Minister would want. And so what's going on instead is talks about putting it into the communique, but not in a way that divides, but in a way that languages.
This secret deal to hand over British overseas territories without parliamentary oversight may have far-reaching consequences, particularly when it comes to other sensitive territorial claims. Argentina and Spain, both of whom have long-standing disputes with the UK over the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar, could see this as a sign of weakening resolve in defending British-held territories. If the UK appears willing to negotiate or even cede territory without consulting Parliament or the public, it could embolden other nations to renew their claims, putting pressure on British sovereignty and stirring international disputes that have been dormant for years.
The Falklands. They are British, and they will remain British. Yes! And sovereignty in Gibraltar is equally not to be negotiated. Of course, we will do everything we can to make it easier for all businesses.
The UK's history with both Argentina and Spain over these territories is complex and charged with national pride and strategic interests. In the case of the Falklands, a remote group of islands in the South Atlantic, Britain has been at odds with Argentina for centuries. Argentina, which refers to the islands as Las Malvinas, has never relinquished its claim, despite Britain's consistent military and political presence there. In 1982, this conflict reached its peak when Argentina attempted to invade, leading to the Falklands War. The UK responded with a decisive show of force, successfully reclaiming the islands and affirming its commitment to protect its territory. This firm stance has, for years, signalled that Britain would not surrender its territories without a fight.
So when the Prime Minister renegotiates the trade deal, can you remember the overseas territories? And ensure that British citizens fishing off the Falklands.
Similarly, the dispute over Gibraltar, located at the southern tip of Spain, has persisted for over 300 years. While Gibraltar is officially British, its geographic position makes it highly strategic. Spain has consistently sought its return, and even recently, Brexit has fueled fresh debates over Gibraltar's status. The British government has always maintained its commitment to Gibraltar's sovereignty, ensuring that Gibraltarians retain their British identity and the territory remains under UK control. A sudden, unexpected territorial concession elsewhere could potentially give Spain the idea that the UK's stance on Gibraltar is weakening, especially under a leadership that bypasses traditional parliamentary processes. The consequences of the government's secretive actions could ripple far beyond the immediate territory in question. For Argentina, Spain, and possibly other nations, this deal might indicate that Britain's commitment to its territories is not as unshakable as it once seemed. Such an impression could lead to renewed pushes for negotiations or even more direct actions to reclaim these areas. The government's secrecy around this deal may end up backfiring, signalling vulnerability rather than strength. In the end, this move could complicate British diplomatic relations, encouraging disputes over territories that many believed were settled long ago. One of the most concerning aspects of this whole ordeal is the glaring lack of democratic involvement in the decision to hand over British territories. Keir Starmer's government bypassed parliamentary checks and skipped any kind of open discussion, leaving both MPs and the public in the dark about a decision that impacts national sovereignty. Such actions raise serious questions about Starmer's commitment to the democratic process. At its core, democracy relies on transparency, debate, and checks and balances. By making unilateral decisions on issues of national importance, Starmer's administration has shaken the foundation of trust that's crucial to a healthy democracy. Unilateral decision-making, the act of making big calls without consulting anyone else, may seem efficient, but it leaves out the voices of elected representatives and, ultimately, the people they represent. For a decision as significant as transferring British territory, one would expect a rigorous parliamentary process, complete with debates, votes, and thorough vetting. That's how democratic checks are supposed to work. They ensure that leaders are held accountable for decisions that affect the nation. The secretive approach taken here suggests a pattern of evading these essential checks, putting democratic integrity at risk and diminishing the public's faith in their leaders. One of the most concerning aspects of this whole ordeal is the glaring lack of democratic involvement in the decision to hand over British territories. Keir Starmer's government bypassed parliamentary checks and skipped any kind of open discussion, leaving both MPs and the public in the dark about a decision that impacts national sovereignty. Such actions raise serious questions about Starmer's commitment to the democratic process. At its core, democracy relies on transparency, debate, and checks and balances. By making unilateral decisions on issues of national importance, Starmer's administration has shaken the foundation of trust that's crucial to a healthy democracy. Unilateral decision-making, the act of making big calls without consulting anyone else, may seem efficient, but it leaves out the voices of elected representatives and, ultimately, the people they represent. For a decision as significant as transferring British territory, one would expect a rigorous parliamentary process, complete with debates, votes, and thorough vetting. That's how democratic checks are supposed to work. They ensure that leaders are held accountable for decisions that affect the nation. The secretive approach taken here suggests a pattern of evading these essential checks, putting democratic integrity at risk and diminishing the public's faith in their leaders. The biggest risk with this kind of approach is the erosion of trust in government. People want to know that their representatives have a voice in major national decisions, and if that voice is silenced or bypassed, it can create a sense of betrayal. It's not just about one deal or one decision, it's about setting a precedent. If one government can make such a significant move without involving Parliament, what's to stop future administrations from doing the same? The potential for abuse of power grows when leaders operate in secrecy, and once that door is open, it becomes harder to close. The public expects accountability, and when that's absent, it can lead to disillusionment with democratic institutions themselves.
You know, what does this mean for the sovereignty of other British sovereign territories? Yeah. He doesn't answer the question. If I was in Gibraltar or in the Falklands, I'd be worried sick listening to this. Here you go.
Starmer's government has promised change and transparency, but decisions like these send a different message entirely. For those who believed in his promises, actions like these could feel like a breach of trust, and for others, it adds to the criticism that this government may not be as democratic as it claims to be. If these patterns continue, Starmer could face a backlash not just from the opposition, but from his supporters and the general public, who are beginning to question whether his approach truly aligns with democratic principles. Reports that Keir Starmer's administration has been appointing individuals to significant positions without proper vetting have only added fuel to the fire. Transparency and integrity are supposed to be at the heart of any political party, but these appointments have left many wondering if those values are being sidelined. The idea that key roles could be filled by unqualified individuals doesn't just raise eyebrows, it creates serious concerns about how decisions are being made within the Labour Party under Starmer's leadership. In times of change, the public expects leaders to prioritise competence and experience over favouritism, and the lack of a transparent recruitment process undermines confidence in the party's integrity. When high-level appointments are made without proper checks, it suggests that positions of influence may be given out based on connections rather than merit. This perception is particularly damaging for Starmer, who came into power promising a new era of accountability and transparency. For a leader who campaigned on restoring public trust, this turn toward closed-door appointments feels like a step backward, casting doubt on the very promises that helped secure his position in the first place. People want to believe that the best person for the job is chosen based on qualifications and suitability, not connections or behind-the-scenes deals. What's at stake here is more than just the reputation of a few individuals. It's about the integrity of the entire Labour Party under Starmer's leadership. These questionable appointments have led some to wonder if merit and accountability are truly priorities for this administration. If top roles are being filled without transparency, it becomes easier to question other aspects of the party's decisions. What else might be happening without public knowledge or oversight? These doubts about Starmer's judgment could lead to a broader scepticism regarding his ability to lead with fairness and clarity.